sure you all agree that was both two fabulous presentations to close the Learning Without Frontiers Festival. I'm completely blown away by both of those. I'd like to ask just one question. It's not the elephant dancing on the table, Jimmy, really. And I'm sure you get asked this all the time, so you'll be able to answer it just like that. I mean, it always strikes me as amazing. You know, I don't know anybody that doesn't use it and enjoys using it and find it useful. It's that just in time, oh, right, I've got the answer. And yet there are the haters. There are the people that say that somehow it's this crowdsourcing, this collaborative effort of all these people getting right at the time, somehow makes it less valuable or somehow less accurate. What is your answer to that?
So I think there's a couple things going on there. So first of all, I think that some people are just like to be contrary, and so it's a good way to sell your book, to sort of hate Wikipedia. That's an interesting book.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I think that there are legitimate concerns, questions about quality that people have. I think those are going away over time as people become familiar with the medium and become familiar with the strengths and weaknesses of Wikipedia. I think that if you initially said, let's open up a website, let's allow anybody to edit, and it's going to become a decent, high-quality encyclopedia, it's complete madness. That's actually impossible. No one can conceive of how that could possibly work. And so only when you say, well, look, I've used Wikipedia, it doesn't seem crazy, and you dig a little deeper, that you realize there's a lot more going on than just that. I think that if I had, at the very beginning, had some kind of really relativist philosophy of, well, what everybody says is the same as what everybody else says, and we laid down community standards and rules that allowed people to just do whatever they wanted, it would have become rubbish. But instead, from the very beginning, we set out to build something of quality and really try to cultivate a good community who care about quality while at the same time maintaining the openness and the dialogue. And I think there's nothing automatic about the software that gives rise to Wikipedia as it is today. I think a big part of it is the social norms, the rules, the thoughtful people who are participating that really make a difference. I think if people don't see that or they don't understand that, they're still stuck in a mode of saying, I don't know, it's written by sort of, you saw them, they're weird, geeky people, right? That's what people think. It's like, who are these people? Well, they're actually really, really smart people who care, and that's what makes it work.
And this sort of ties back into what David was talking about. These sort of obstacles. It's almost like stating the blooming obvious. I mean, we were both in Qatar recently, and I've been to a number of those things, and I'm sure you've been to many more. And year after year after year, we say education is important. Well, yeah, we know that. And 70 million children don't have access to primary education. How many years are we going to keep saying that? There seems to be these continual obstacles. And it strikes me that the sort of obstacles that Jimmy's talking about, in the sense of, it's like, oh, it can't be perfect because all these... It's almost the same within the education sector. We're talking about change. Everyone here, obviously, is a choir. We know about it. But there seems to be that constant resistance. Why do you think that resistance is there?
I don't know. I spent some time, and I'd be interested to look it up on Wikipedia, studying triage. Triage is a really interesting subject, It is, those who are not familiar with it, it's basically the study of priorities. Came out of medicine, obviously, and it's the way in which doctors, all doctors now, certainly in Western Europe and I think in the United States, have to go through a process of making judgments post an accident or after a disaster, whether it's better to spend an hour trying to save that life or accept the fact you can't and get on with 3 or 4 other people you can save. So that's triage. The reason I say that is because, for me, education is the quintessence of this. Money and resources and time spent on education can, as I said at the end of my text, can result in being able to afford and indulge a whole slew of other things that are utterly desirable. Good pensions, good health systems. But never, ever, ever will time, effort, and energy spent on the health system itself fund a health system. So actually, when governments take this issue seriously and look at their priorities and their options, they increasingly, I think, have to be forced to invest, if necessary, massively and disproportionately in education, because only then will they be able to afford to offer their own citizens, country by country, the kind of lives that they want and the kind of priorities that they themselves want to address. And to me, it's our failure. I said right at the end there, we've got to get better at making our case. It's our failure to get across the notion that if you took a triagist attitude to this, education is the whole ball of wax. Education is fundamental to raising the level of everything. And I think what Jimmy's doing is a phenomenal contribution to making that possible.
It's interesting because I think in many places, I mean, we can come to it from the perspective of, you know, Britain, Europe, the US, and so on. And then we can complain about this and that and the other. But when we go into Africa or into the poor parts of India, you realize that the quote from Bertrand Russell earlier is perhaps a dramatic understatement. The degree to which the governments there really care about education is minimal. They may pay some lip service if it means a few more donor dollars they can steal. I hate to be that cynical about it. What I'm hopeful about is that the internet and other, you know, it's not just Wikipedia, but it is Wikipedia, the internet, mobile phones, the overall decrease in the cost of information technology and therefore information will begin to short circuit some of that, so that people who are being deprived of education for very malicious reasons will begin to find some tools to educate themselves. Because I think people by their nature do desire to learn and will learn to make their lives better. But it's not, doesn't happen automatically.
You certainly say the sense, and in some of the forums that I've been at, it's like the last thing you want is an intelligent population, because once you have an intelligent population, they start asking questions. So
it depends. It depends, because I think there's different levels of that. I think if you view your main source of revenue as oil coming out of the ground, then the people are kind of a nuisance. But if you're a thoughtful and enlightened leader and you say, I really want to be rich, even myself, I want to be rich. I want my colleagues to be rich. Well, you don't get rich from poor people. You need a thriving economy, and you need educated people to do that.
It's worth mentioning that, you know, several times the word disruptive came up. We're celebrating, I think, this week, the 400th anniversary of the publication of the King James Bible. This was a quite extraordinary thing that occurred. There was never an event more disruptive. It created chaos, because people suddenly began to create their own version of what these events were. People started saying, well, actually, it's not actually the way the priest told me. That wasn't the way I understood it. And the King James Bible created chaos throughout about 50 years of the 17th century. And I think, in a sense, there's a lesson to be learned there. And Jimmy's right. Governments are, yeah, they want educated people, and yes, they want educated people into jobs. But do they really want educated people to the point they're going to start questioning? And are they going to be better informed than government, which is really beginning to happen? There was a marvellous moment the other day, I don't know if any of you picked it up, a relatively young MP, who just obviously got onto a select committee here in the UK, and again, I'm sorry, this is slightly Anglo-centric, but it's not, had an iPad in front of her. And she was asking questions of, actually happened to be a guy from the film industry, which was why I was watching it. Asked a couple of questions. She obviously wasn't entirely happy with his answer. The thing moved on to another MP. And you saw her tapping away, and she said, excuse me. She said, that's not what you said last week. And she had his quote from a previous investigation, and she just grilled the guy, and it was unprecedented in Parliament. The chairman, this is going to happen in the classroom. Now, the chairman was thrown. He didn't even know whether it was right for her to be looking at her thing or checking the facts that lay behind the question. And clearly, this is massively disruptive, and it's what, again, in a sense, it's exactly what Jimmy's doing. He's constantly, day after day, having to review and revise a lot of our pre-packaged and our assumptions.
Let's get some questions from the audience. Let's get some audience participation here. I need the lights up just slightly so I can see people, and I need the roving mics. Gentleman over here is the first one that caught my eye. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions.
About mobile in the developing world, I have a whole speech about that.
I love the video at the end particularly, and that's kind of what I bought into and really wanted to contribute to Wikipedia and have edited. You know, it's great as a librarian to be able to go and correct typos and things like that. But I came across this subject where there was nothing on Wikipedia, and I thought, okay, I'll write an article. This is what I've always wanted to do. And I did my utmost, wrote it, researched it, put in footnotes and references to say where it came from. And it lived there for about 2 or 3 weeks, and then the Wiki police came along and tossed it out and said, no, you can't do that. And I was really put out. The upside is that I can at least say to lecturers and academics who say, oh, there's no quality control and so on, I can say, actually, there is, and it's pretty good, because it caught up with me in just a few weeks. But my frustration is that I wanted to be part of that, and there was kind of I tried to get in touch with the editor who thrown it out, and it was really difficult because of the way, as you say, it was complicated to interact with them. You couldn't just email or anything. But it was my frustration at not being able to participate when I really wanted to, and I felt like I'd done a good job.
Yeah, that's a sad story. No, it really is.
I've got a question in there.
So sometimes when I hear a story like this, and then I say, as I'm going to say to you, please email me. I find stories like that interesting. And sometimes I go and I find that you wrote about your grandmother that nobody's ever heard of, and it didn't really meet the rules of Wikipedia, in which I would say, it's actually a great essay about your grandmother, but you should just publish it somewhere, but it's not an encyclopedia article. Sometimes I find, oh dear, something went horribly wrong here. But I would love to know. I think it's really interesting. One of the things that we do struggle with is how do we bring new people into the community, particularly now that the community is very mature. The site in English is very mature. We have over 3 million entries, and so it's fairly surprising. I think everybody's surprised. You say, wow, here's some completely sensible topic, and I went to Wikipedia and they didn't have anything. It's like, wow, and you really say, oh, well, I should do something about this. It's getting harder and harder to do that, and so that means it's harder and harder for newcomers to contribute. Also, our standards relating to referencing, style, and so on, there is a certain house style to Wikipedia. It shouldn't cause something to get thrown out, though. Ideally, things should be edited, updated, fixed up. You should get some messages. But there is a lot of it where people are, new editors in particular, are baffled. Oh, how do I contact? Who do I contact? What's happened here? Where did my article go? I don't understand what I'm supposed to do about it. And that's one of the things that we at the foundation, we're looking at the usability of the software to say, what are the problems that particularly new editors face? They're trying to join the community. They're acting in good faith. They run into some obstacle which, if you're an experienced Wikipedian, you just go, oh, I see what happened here. I know what to do about it. But they just say, I don't understand. I don't know what to do. And they just leave. And that's, that's silly. We wouldn't want that. So it is a priority.
What we're going to do is we're going to take 3 questions. Okay. And then if that's okay with you guys, then we can get through them. If we can keep them brief. And as questions as opposed to comments, that'd be great. So just a name and your question will be fantastic. So the first one over here, then we're going to go over here, and then down to here.
Hi, Jimmy. Education has a big stopper on it, and that is teachers, in the sense that there will never be enough teachers. They're human beings, they're non-scalable. Could you envisage a future where there is a version of Wikipedia or an adjunct to Wikipedia that brings it into the educational sphere? And there was a whole load of crowdsourced content around step-by-step learning, a bunch of self-assessment tools that really does make this completely and utterly relevant to learners. And that would be a real quantum leap in the educational field, because that doesn't really exist. It's fragmented and it's scattered. Could that be possible? Would you consider that as an option?
Okay. We'll take another question as well. Sheila.
Yes, this is for Lord Puttnam. Sheila Crew from the National City Learning Centres. You obviously prize technology and education and the advances that have been made over the last 10 years. And I'm wondering, have you got any opportunity to bring your influence to bear on the current political scene or the people involved in it?
And you, sir?
This is to both. This is both Lord Puttnam and Jimmy. My name's Emil. I'm part of a new school in Adelaide, Australia, and I'd just like to ask you, what are 3 things that you would like to see different in the classroom at the moment, right now?
Okay. So political influence, 3 things you'd like to see happen in the classroom now, and the impact on teachers.
Well, so for this one, I would say we have a project called Wikibooks, which is an attempt to create a free curriculum, from kindergarten up through the university level. It has struggled as a project for a variety of reasons. So one of the reasons is that our software is really well designed for creating an encyclopedia, but it is not well designed for creating, for example, self-assessment tools. Also, for the Wikimedia Foundation, for a great many years, we have been struggled, to raise the money to keep Wikipedia on the air, and we've never had the resources to really invest in Wikibooks or some of our other side projects to really give them the software that they need. But then there's also a deeper problem that is actually a very subtle problem. which has to do with educational standards, which I'm all for in general, but it becomes difficult for our community when we have very fragmented educational standards across many things. They're not always well written. One of the things that really motivates volunteers is that someone will use what you're doing. You want to be useful. You want to be productive. And so I feel like if I go to Lord Puttnam's biography in Wikipedia and I make some change, I know someone will read it. And so someone will benefit. If I made it a little better, I'm being helpful in some way. If I go to Wikibooks and I write a chapter for, 13-year-old's science class, is anybody ever going to use it? Because to use it in the classroom in many jurisdictions around the world, it's just impossible unless it goes through a standards approval process. So therefore, it's demotivating for volunteers to create the free resources because they feel like, well, the schools can't use it anyway. I think that is potentially can be changed over time. I think that it becomes, it's a sort of a chicken and egg problem. But in general, if we speak very broadly, very philosophically, I'm on the advisory board of CK12, which is an effort to create a kindergarten through 12th grade curriculum that is conformant with US standards. It's well funded by Neeru Khosla, who is the wife of Mr. Khosla, one of the founders of Sun. Vinod, I'm so sorry. Vinod, if you're watching, I'm sorry. Vinod, one of the founders of Sun, big venture capitalist, and she drives that organization, and they're having success, but it's taking time. And it's difficult to get things. But they have enough funding and they have enough passion that they're going to get some things approved. And I think once they get some things approved, it will bring out the volunteers who will feel like, hey, I could actually do something here, and it's actually going to be useful. And so I think I think it's possible, yeah. I'm optimistic about that kind of thing.
I mean, there's a question about political influence and what influence...
Yeah, it's a tough one to answer, Sheila. On the one hand, the short answer, I suppose, has to be probably not, because I'm in a different party. But on the other hand, Jonathan Hill, who technically is the technology minister, is a friend of mine, is a very, very fine man indeed. And I get a strong sense there's actually quite a lot of churn taking place right now. I think the Tories came in thinking that education was an area that they could ideologically move into, win themselves a lot of friends, and create a lot of change. And I think they've discovered quite very quickly it's much more complicated than that. I watched for a dozen years with my own party good ideas go a-begging simply because we were not as a party prepared to take on full-on the Daily Mail. And may sound rather ridiculous, but I saw any number of very, very promising initiatives and very, very promising things we could have done, which once opposed by the Daily Mail for their own reasons, but the party just backed off. Now, interestingly enough, because the Tories are prepared in a sense to take that issue rather differently. They're not frightened, I don't think, of the Mail in exactly the same way. I think something quite interesting might emerge. I think Gove's having to accept the fact, he spoke this morning, having to accept the fact that a lot of the prejudices he came into the job with are having to evaporate. I think he's possibly struggling politically. I don't think he's enjoying the political process in my very, very strong sense. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if in the next 6 months, either he's not there, not because they're fired, I think he just may have had enough, he's not a natural politician, or he will have decided actually the situation is a lot more complicated and he's going to have to start talking much, much more to the profession. And I say that with real force, because there are over 22,000 head teachers in this country. They talk to about half a dozen. Nick Gibb, who was his deputy, has been to one primary school since being in power. They've got to clean that part of their act up. They've got to engage with the profession, and they've got to understand that they will change absolutely nothing if they can't carry the profession with them. So I'm, in a sense, slightly hopeful. And if they do make those decisions, who knows? The phone may ring and someone might say, listen, you're not necessarily such a terrible guy. What do you think about this? Doubtful, but not impossible.
Now, I want to pick up the question here, because this is an interesting one, gentleman down here. So we have a blank sheet of paper, a brand new school. What would be the three things that you would like to see in a new school? And I want to just sort of augment that question slightly, because I understand, Jimmy, you homeschool with your family. So that kind of puts another dimension to this notion of a question about what you would have, because obviously you made a decision about doing that. So please, both of you, could you have a stab at what, with a blank sheet of paper, what would a new school have?
It's very tricky,
because
there are any number of things you can do with a school, any number of things, and you can actually move and change a school quite successfully and quite quickly. The biggest problem I've encountered dealing with this entire world of education is going to scale. And one of the reasons for that, I think, is that many of the finest academic minds who deal in educational reform and engage with educational reform are kind of perfectionists. They have an idea, they play it through a school, or maybe a small group of schools, or maybe a local education authority, and it kind of works. But you then say, as all of us in business, certainly Jimmy will know, the moment you want to move to scale, you have to make, and I say this as a ex-movie producer, you have to start making concessions, and you have to start compromising. And it's the world of educational research doesn't really like compromise, and in a sense prefers to move on to the next school and the next nice idea and the next experiment, rather than actually wrestle with the nightmare problems of taking a great idea, compromising it to a degree, and then taking it out in Britain to 27,000 schools. That is a real problem. So therefore, what will you do with a school is almost irrelevant to the other 26,999.
Great.
Over to you.
Over to me. Well, I would have to say, actually I wanted to say a comment on this question about the UK government, and it's just nothing but unrestricted praise here. I think one of the remarkable things that you have in this country is the House of Lords. Not all of them, mind you, but it's amazing that you are able to get people in government who aren't politicians. We don't have that at all. Our Senate is a disaster. So as the House of Lords reform continues, I hope that they'll find a way to preserve that. Anyway, 3 things to change in schools. I can only think of one, actually, because I'm not very good at thinking of 3 things. But the one core thing that I do see a need for is increased teaching people media competence, teaching people how to assess the quality of sources of information. I think this is one of the most fundamental skills in the world today. It's always been important, but I think it's become dramatically more important as the sources of information have become much more diverse. In the old days, you had textbooks, books, newspapers, which ranged from bad to good, but you sort of got the idea. To today, when you have immediate, instant access to academic journals, which are very high quality, but also maybe difficult to understand and interpret correctly. You have access to blogs, which can range from absolutely brilliant and amazing to complete nonsense. You have conspiracy theory websites. You have Wikipedia, which is pretty good, but also needs to be understood and needs to be something that students know how to use. I was on a radio program a while back with a college professor who said, I tell the kids in my class, don't even look at Wikipedia. And I said, you can also tell them not to listen to rock and roll music because it's going to do the same amount of good. Instead, we have to say, look, everybody's using the internet. Students are 100% of all college students are using Wikipedia as a means of getting information for their homework. Well, that's good. It's also bad. It's also, we need to teach them how to use it. We need to teach them, what's the right way to do it? When do you use it? When do you not use it? Or how do you use it to get started? How do you use it to go deeper into a subject in a faster amount of time than you would have been able to had you not had it at your fingertips? And so that kind of education, I think, should be integral to every, I think the first thing you should do in university is learn how to use the internet, learn how to use Wikipedia from this perspective of quality of knowledge. So that's my big one. That trumps everything else. With respect to my daughter, I think it's interesting. Yes, my daughter is 10 years old and homeschooled, so she doesn't go to school, but that's really not something I would necessarily advocate for everyone. I'm not a big homeschooling advocate per se, although I think it's fabulous. It's just it wouldn't make sense for her as an individual to go to school. She is quite smart, far smarter than I am, far smarter than I ever was. And so for her, I remember we took her to tour a kindergarten. where they were going to teach her how to read. And she, we got back in the back seat of the car to leave, and I looked back at her and I said, well, what did you think? And she's cracking open the 5th Harry Potter book, and she said, boring. So it just never made any sense for her to go to school. So instead, what she does is she studies at home with her mom, with me. So she's doing computer programming with me, and she's doing math and history and so forth with her mom. In her spare time, she likes to make movies. So I can't wait to show her that movie that we saw earlier. She just showed me this movie she made, stop-motion animation. And it's amazing, the tools that are available to her. I mean, as a kid, I thought, you watch the old Frosty the Snowman and things like that, and you think, wow, that'd be really cool if I had a camera and I could make but wow, film costs a lot, everything costs a lot. Now it's all free, Now she can just do it. She's got her computer, and so she made this little movie about horses and so forth. You don't do that at school.
I did wonder whether that was part of the thinking, because there is so much more informal learning going on now. You mentioned your daughter making films, and I think that we could all pass on anecdotes of our children doing these things that is not really being seen as evidence of learning, and yet surely it is, and also very relevant learning. I don't, David, whether you'd like to comment on what's happening on outside with gaming and making videos and creativity and the things that for some reason don't get classified as evidence of attainment or learning outcomes.
I had felt for a long, long time, and you had several people here this morning talking about it, that the big breakthrough in learning, the big breakthrough will ultimately come via the games industry. It'll be people working within the games industry where the penny will drop, and they will begin to understand how you capture young people, capture their attention, and having captured their attention, absolutely feed their imaginations and a learning process. I have no doubt at all that will happen. And what I'm hoping is that the conventional educational world is sufficiently awake to that it can hang on to its ethos, hang on to its values, and ensure that those values get protected and built into the work that I think that the games world could introduce education to. It's this synthesis, I think. It's the synthesis of technology, imagination via games, and the values of education that we have to try and achieve. And it's not going to be easy. It's going to be very tough. I may never be on a stage with Jimmy again. I've got to ask one thing. This is both an enormous compliment
yes, you can ask
and a concern.
It's
a compliment and concern. I produced through my career, Jimmy, 30 movies, a dozen of which I'm fairly proud of, 10 of which are not terrible, 8 of which I would much rather forget, but you haven't. There they are. There they are. And I'm not. But what I did want to say is one thing. There is one film there that's called, it's attributed to me, The Wild, Wild World of Jane Mansfield. Jimmy, I swear to you, I did not produce The Wild, Wild World of Jane Mansfield.
Brilliant, brilliant. This is being recorded and on the web, so I actually have a reference. All right, we'll get right on
Can somebody just update that, please?
Exactly.
Okay, well, I think on that note, I think I'd love to do this for the whole evening, and unfortunately we are pressed for time now. So, please, I think actually all of the speakers have been fantastic. These guys have been amazing. Please join me in an applaud for them.
Thank you.